from our ERGs, and then we will have a speaker and a panel discussion. Make sure you have your questions ready. We have some amazing women here today talking about diversity and women. And prepare your question. There is a microphone there that you can ask your questions from all of them at the Q&A time. And make sure at the end you share your learnings with each other and exchange contact. We also have a recruitment table there. So if you're interested in working at CBC, make sure you talk to our fine recruiters over there. And also, if you want to know more, talk to all of our volunteers that are across the floor. And now I'll give it over to Diana to talk about our ERGs.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Deanna Cadet. I'm with the Engagement and Inclusion team at CBC. We are incredibly excited about today's event. We are the home of the 6 employee resource groups at the CBC, and that includes the 2 ERGs that have organized this celebration, Women in Tech and Visible Women. I'm going to please give them a hand, a round of applause, because this was a lot of work. ERGs are created and led by CBC staff across the country. They're advised by senior CBC executives, and they're guided and funded by our team. They're an integral part of E&I's vision to make CBC a place where everyone feels like they belong and they have a great experience. And by everyone, we mean our colleagues, independent content creators, and our audience. So on behalf of our team, we want to thank Women in Tech and Visible Women, who we like to stress all have important day jobs at CBC and did all of this on a volunteer basis. We want to thank them for their drive and their determination in creating this fantastic event to celebrate women and their accomplishments. Here to speak on behalf of Visible Women is Marie, who has worked across the world, around the world, in embassies and NGOs. She'll be followed with Afsun, who has her PhD and is the founder of a tech company. So take it away, Marie.
Thank you, Diana. Hi, everyone. So I'm Marie-John. I'm a junior specialist for talent acquisition in people and culture. We have a table over there. Hi, guys. And I'm a member of Visible Women over there. Ladies. So Visible Women ERG was started to create a network and a space of dialogue for women of color and our allies within the CBC Radio Canada. We support our members by sharing resources, accessing various information sessions and or training, and sharing inspirational stories from within as well as outside sources. Pour nos amis francophones, bonjour. Mon nom est Marie-John, spécialiste junior à l'acquisition de talents pour personnes écriture, et je fais partie des Femmes Visibles. Donc, le groupe d'affinité Femmes Visibles a été fondé afin de créer un réseau et un espace de dialogue pour les femmes de couleur et nos alliés au sein de CBC Radio-Canada. Notre groupe appuie ses membres par la mise en commun de ressources, de séances d'information, de la formation ou le partage de réussites inspirantes au sein de la corporation et d'ailleurs. So I'd like to thank our co-chairs for Visible Women, Maya over there, and Jan is somewhere. And now, please welcome Asun from Women in Tech. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So Women in Tech is, as Diana mentioned, it's one of our ERGs at CBC. It was created a few years ago to showcase and empower women in technology at CBC. We inspire, encourage, and enable women in technology at CBC to be successful. This year's focus has been on advocacy and awareness, and this event is one of the milestones that we have invested in. We have monthly meetings to create a safe space that is inclusive for women. We support the development of women in workspace and contribute to their advancement. Needless to say, we do have a lot of many female and male colleagues in our group who are our allies, mentors, mentees, and sponsors. And it is with great leadership of all of these people that we can build together, learn together, and empower and inspire women in our communities. Our executive sponsor couldn't be here today. She's Sue Kim. And I just wanted to give a shout out to our co-chairs, Sharon and Tandra, Thank you. And this event couldn't have been possible, live streamed and recorded, available online without the help of our technical crew here today who have volunteered their time to be here. I just want to quickly give a shout out to them as well. So the people who have been helping at this event today is Craig McDonald, Dave Hall, Victor Kerr, David Allmark, Kelly Brown, Danielle Pereira, Neil Watson, Serena Waugh, Susan Goodspeed, Pascal Mongrain, Catherine Van Bezold, and our photographer Michael Wilson and graphic designer Faydoun Mirzad. And I just want to thank all of them. So now, to officially kickstart our event today, I would like you to invite to watch a video that has been made with a lot of our CBC colleagues, including our President and CEO, Catherine Tate, to welcome you to the event. Thank you.
The thing about being a woman is kind of standing your ground, knowing when you are correct in certain situations and not being afraid to stand up for what you know is right.
Society has constantly told women that we are not good enough, that we have to look a certain way, that we're just not on par with men.
Even in the workforce, I always read that women have to work twice as hard as a man to prove where they are or where they want to be.
Being a black woman, you face the injustices of being a woman, but you also face the injustices of being black, and sometimes those things can be conflicting.
When I was little, I wanted to be an astronaut. I am not an astronaut, obviously.
I wanted to be an Olympic speed skater, like Katrina LeMay-Doan, and I wanted to be a broadcaster, so I'm doing all right. I'm very lucky.
To become a TV host. that was my dream. It's still my dream.
When I was little, I dreamed of being a camera person. I had a little toy camera, what I would pretend to take photos all the time.
I'm a little bit embarrassed to say this, but I wanted to be a dentist. And I wanted to be a dentist because I had a crush on my dentist.
The advice I would give to my younger self, if I could go back in time, would be just to know yourself.
Your expression of femininity is always going to be correct.
Walk into the room, Sarah, if you're ever on air, with the trust and with the confidence that an average man has.
If they don't accept you for who you are, you don't want to be there anyway.
Accepting yourself, accepting your body, and if you're not happy, maybe just try to make changes, but I think that's important.
I would really tell myself to love myself. I think I'm a perfectionist, and it took me 30 years to really allow myself to give up that need to be perfect, and in that process I've realized that that's really when the magic happens.
You may not know what's coming, but doing it is the only way for you to find out. So close off your ears to all of the noise and then just listen to what you really want inside and go for it.
Find your voice and do not be afraid to use it, especially if you come from a place where women's voices are not often heard. Understand that obstacles for women in the workplace still exist, and be ready to call it out. Be bold and be brave.
The best thing about being a woman working at CBC ERG Canada is seeing the myriad examples of strong, educated, tenacious women that I get to share this building with.
Knowing that you always sort of have a support system around you, and you can always count on everybody else's strength.
I really feel like I work with a team that supports me and believes in me and tells me that I have value, and that makes such a difference. I'm just so lucky to be here. It's the people.
Seeing that everyone respects your work and making a difference.
The amount of women in leadership positions is one of the most inspiring things about working here, because you look at them and then you realize that you could be one of them.
CBC is one of the great companies in Canada where gender parity has been actually achieved. From senior management to throughout our productions, powerful, capable women are present. And I'm so proud of that.
The hardest thing about being a woman
Thank you so much for coming here today. You know, I was just looking, of course, at that video, as you were too, and I was thinking, okay, those women all work here. I actually don't know them. I think I've seen one or two in the elevator, but it's such a big place, right? We're all colleagues, but we don't get a chance to mingle very much and connect, and this is really a nice opportunity, I hope, for you and for us to do that. My name is Mary Ito, and I'm a host and producer with CBC Radio 1. This is our celebration on behalf of CBC for International Women's Day, and it really is a pleasure for me to be here because, as you know, the last couple of weeks, even the last couple of months, have been very busy news-wise. And we're finding, you know, the news cycle is so fast now, things are changing by the moment. It's very difficult for me to even get a washroom break sometimes. So being here right now, it is really lovely, especially on this sunny day. And I so appreciate that you've all taken the time, your precious time, because I know how busy our lives are, but that you've come out to join us today. We hope that this event will be thought-provoking for you, that it'll be informative. We have a wonderful keynote speaker coming up. I'm going to tell you a bit more about her later. We also have a Women's Day panel. It's going to be hosted by my colleague, Manjula Selvarajah, so we hope you stay for that. Now, the UN began celebrating International Women's Day back in 1975. That is 45 years ago. So I guess it begs the question, where are we today? It's 45 years later since we first celebrated. And if you go to the UN Women's site, this is what it says. Real change has been agonizingly slow for the majority of women and girls in the world. Today, not a single country can claim to have achieved gender equality. Multiple obstacles remain unchanged in law and culture. Women and girls continue to be undervalued. They work more and earn less and have fewer choices. And they experience multiple forms of violence at home and in public places. Furthermore, there is a significant threat of rollback of hard-won feminist gains. That's on the UN Women's site. And of course, we all know that there is so much more to be done, and right here at home. I don't know if any of you caught Metro Morning this morning or the news, but there was a CBC analysis about domestic violence shelters across the country, right here in Canada. And I just want to share this one statistic with you because I was at home listening to it as I was getting ready, and it really took me aback. In November alone, last year, 19,000 women and children were turned away from shelters. 19,000, and that is only November alone. And that figure is probably low because in the survey they done, only 60% of shelters responded. We have to do better. And you know, one thing that strikes me, and this isn't a new sentiment, but I'm not sure whether we're doing women a disservice, or maybe even the concept of gender equality, by always aligning the two. Because gender equality is not a women's issue. And I mean, I understand why it has been, the historical context, but really, we often tie it to women and we often tie it to this day, but it does imply that the responsibility for change falls on our shoulders, on women's shoulders, and it is an issue for everyone. This year, the UN campaign is called Each for Equal, and it is about the powerful impact that we as individuals, not just women, but we as individuals can make. And when we work together for gender equality, we are a powerful voice. I think it's also important that today we celebrate the gains that we have made as a society, despite the work that still needs to be done. We need to acknowledge and give thanks for the enormous sacrifices and hard work that so many before us and so many today are putting into this issue. And they're often unrecognized. But I think we also need to celebrate as individuals what we've done in our own lives, what we've passed on to our children, the difference that we've made to our families, our friends, our workplaces, and our communities. And I'd like to start by acknowledging and in fact celebrating the people who made today's event possible. This is the CBC's Employee Resource Group, Women in Tech and Visible Women. Can you please stand so we can acknowledge you? And these women have full-time jobs, but they volunteered to put this event on for us. So we're very appreciative of all the time and effort. And they're the force behind today's event. Right now, I would like to introduce, as I mentioned, on stage our keynote speaker, who is Professor Sarah Kaplan. She is a distinguished professor of strategic management at the Rotman School of Management, director of the Institute for Gender and the Economy at the University of Toronto. She's also the co-author of the best-selling business books, Creative Destruction, Survive and Thrive, Winning Against Strategic Threats to Your Business. And her latest book is called The 360 Corporation, From Stakeholder Trade-Offs to Transformation. And we're also going to have questions after her talk, so please feel free if she brings up anything you'd like to know more. We have set up a mic right there in the aisle, so if you have any questions, please feel free, come forward and you can speak to Professor Kaplan. The topic of today's speech is Making Real Progress on Gender Equality. Please give a warm welcome for Dr. Sarah Kaplan.
I'd shake your hand, but
we'll do the
okay.
So I just want to say that this is not my first introduction to Professor Kaplan. I am so thrilled to be able to meet her in person, because last year I launched a learning festival for the public. It's called CRAM, Communicating Research and More. And it just came out of my years as a journalist and interviewing so many researchers and realizing that there's such a thirst on the part of the public to know about research, to know about these things that are changing our lives. And there's so much research that is happening in universities that we don't know about. So I thought, well, let's connect, let's fill this gap. And CRAM happened last April with all 4 universities in Toronto. We ran 35 presentations, and Dr. Kaplan's was one of them. So I want to thank you, Dr. Kaplan, for being a part of that.
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. So I'm super happy to be here. I have been on a number of your different shows, both radio and TV, as well as quoted in some of your online sources, and so it's so great to actually participate with you in this conversation. I want to echo the acknowledgement of the territory on which we are meeting today. I think it's very important for us to understand that this is the traditional lands of many different nations, and is still the home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, and is covered by Treaty 13. And I always like to make sure that we pay attention to that. And I'm grateful. As an immigrant to Canada, I became a citizen last week. Time flies. I'm going to get my passport right after this, so I'm really excited. But let me say, I have a little picture, or a large picture actually, of Matt Galloway up there, and I know he's moved from Metro Morning, but I literally learned what it was like what it meant to be a Canadian, excuse me, from listening to that show every morning. So I owe a lot to the CBC for helping me become a Canadian. So I'm super grateful. And thanks to Marie John and the whole team, and obviously Mary Ito for inviting me here today. So in theory, the title of my talk is Making Real Progress on Gender Equality. This morning I woke up and I said to my partner, I think the actual title should be I'm impatient and I'm in a bad mood. Because it's 2020. And we're still having this conversation. And I want us to not be having this I want us to get somewhere. And a lot of the statistics have suggested that if we're gonna get anywhere, it's gonna take a very, very long period of time. You can look at reports. I don't care if you're looking at the World Economic Forum, the UN. I just got called by one of your colleagues to do the syndicate tomorrow morning, which sadly I will not have to get up at 6 a.m. because I'm not going to be completely available for that, to talk about the latest report that's come out that basically says 9 out of 10 people still hold biases against women. And this is not biases against women, this is about biases against women having equal access to things like education, jobs, or freedom from violence. And so we have a huge problem globally. Canada is better than that. It's not 9 out of 10, it's 50-50. There's still 50% of the population who has a belief that women should not have equal access to either political life, economic life, or freedom from violence. And in fact, echoing exactly what Mary Ito was talking about in terms of what was on the radio show this morning, one of the areas where Canada is the most biased is in the belief that women should not be free from physical violence. So we have a long way to go here in Canada. So new title, I'm impatient and I'm in a bad mood. Okay. And so I want to tell you a little bit about that, but then we're going to do Q&A, and then we're going to have a fantastic panel, which I want to get us to as well. I also want to point out that a lot of times when we talk about gender, we do two things. One, we think about the binary, when we now know that, of course, it's not just men and women, that there are people who have many different gender identities, and we need to acknowledge that. And I think Each for Equal, the new hashtag, is part of that. And the second thing is that a lot of the biases, the disadvantages, or the tough roads to walk on are, highly impacted by what we think of as intersectional identity. So people who are facing discrimination along multiple dimensions. And so we know that most of the work that we've done on gender equality over the last 2 or 3 decades, the progress has been slow, but most of the advantage has come to straight white women and not to really any other kind of person with a different gender identity, or to people with disabilities, racialized minorities, and the like. So I think we really need, 2020, I think, is the year when we need to start thinking about who exactly is facing these barriers. The gap is closing very slowly, as I said. One of the things that we do track in Canada, because we have regulation from the Ontario Securities Commission that's called Comply or Explain, although there's nothing actually to comply to, because we don't actually ask companies to report, to hit any kind of target for women in leadership or women on boards, but it does at least ask companies to say how many women they have in executive leadership or how many women they have on boards. And despite even 4 years where this reporting was mandatory and companies had to explain whether or not they had a diversity policy, we're still seeing that only 32% of companies have more than one women executive officer, and 36% of the TSX have no women in executive leadership roles. Only 4% of CEOs are women. So we're not making very much progress, even on those metrics that we're paying a ton of attention to, which is executive corporate leadership, no less a lot of the different kinds of things that will be of interest to you. So the gap is closing extremely slowly, and so we get things like this. I don't know if you saw this New York Times article a few years ago, where they mapped out all of the CEOs of the Fortune 500, and what they found was that there was actually about the same number of CEOs named John as there were women altogether. And by the way, I think this stat has gotten worse because some of these CEOs are no longer in place, CEO of PepsiCo, CEO of IBM. So in fact, if your name is John, good on you, you have a lot of opportunities, but we're still in a situation where, and I spent a lot of time, because I'm in a business school, thinking about corporate leadership, and I think that's a really important space, because of course companies are the places that generate jobs and generate the economy and generate the products and services that we use. And if we don't have that leadership, we're not going to have an equal economic opportunities throughout our economy. So as Mary said, I am the director of the Institute for Gender and the Economy at the Rotman School, and the goal of the Institute is to use rigorous research to change the conversation on gender equality. My hypothesis about why we've made so little progress is that we're having a series of very tired conversations where we're saying the same old thing all the time. Oh, women don't ask, women are more risk averse, those kinds of things. And it turns out most of those things that people are saying, the common beliefs that people have, are basically all false when you pay attention to the academic research. So I'm an academic researcher. What I'm trying to do is bring some of those insights to people like you who are actually doing the work and trying to really make a difference. And so what I'm going to share with you today is some of that research. Okay. So first of all, if we go back to this statistic about why we have so few women on boards of directors, only 17% of board members are women. They are controlling our economy. And when you look at the explanations, as I have now done, so you have to download these 100-page reports for 800 companies over 4 years. So it's been a lot of work, 3 years of work. We've read through all of the explanations, and the prominent explanation, the one that gets offered by most companies, is something around meritocracy. They say, well, we don't have women on the board because we don't want to compromise quality. I know. Back to my headline, I'm impatient and I'm in a bad mood, right? Like, just reading that puts me in a bad mood, because they're basically saying we only want to pick the best candidates. Of course, if the best candidate is a woman, we would pick her. We just can't find any women. And, you know, we have a pipeline, there's no qualified women. It's a bunch of, explanations that really don't hold water. I was going to say a swear word, but then I realized I'm being recorded, so no. It's a bunch of explanations that don't hold water. But people truly believe them. And so one of the things I want to do with this research is show that these are beliefs that people have about quality and meritocracy that are actually false. And so let me give you some data around that. So this is data from the implicit bias test. How many of you have ever taken the implicit association test? A few of you, not so many. Okay. I don't know whether to recommend it to you, because basically if you go to you can Google implicit at Harvard, you can get a test on how people associate women with careers, women with STEM. There's a test for your bias against people of color, for people with, who are LGBTQ identified, et cetera. It's basically 50 ways for you to hate yourself, right? Because if you take this test, as this one shows, you will find most likely that you are biased. In this particular test, what it says is nearly 80% of people have some association of women with family and men with career. And then some of us have the opposite association, but most of us associate women with family and men with career. So what does that mean? That means that when we start thinking about careers and promotions and economic opportunities and women's entrepreneurship, we are not thinking of women for those things because we have associated them with family, and we think that men are going to be more qualified because that's how our brains work. Now, we spent a lot of years trying to fix our brains through all sorts of implicit association, implicit bias training, and it turns out that training mainly doesn't work. The research also says that this training doesn't work in part because the challenge is not to fix our brains, but to fix our systems and processes and procedures in what we do. Our brains are natural categorizers. We will always be categorizing. That's how we function in the world with the billions of data points that are flowing into us all the time. So fixing the categorizing is hard. We can do it, and there's lots of ways to change. If you look at changing representation, that really makes a difference. But the problem is it gets embedded in our systems, and I want to show you 3 examples of ways that it is then affecting the outcomes, the career outcomes of women and the economic outcomes of women. So, okay. People are arguing that it's not about, that it's about quality, that somehow women, if you added women, it would compromise quality. And so a lot of researchers have said, let's test for that. And so they found situations where the quality is identical and the only difference is the gender marker. So for example, in this first one, they gave people identical resumes, and the only difference is that at the top of the resume, one says Jennifer and one says John. They then asked hiring managers, okay, you've evaluated a resume, and how hireable is this person? And it turns out that John, identical resume to Jennifer, is much more hireable than Jennifer is. And there's no quality difference, so you can't make a meritocracy argument here at all. Second, go to entrepreneurship. We're obsessed with women's entrepreneurship. We think that this is going to be the magical fix for all of women's economic problems, even though it's like literally the riskiest career that you could take on. So it's like, let's push women into the riskiest career. But we have this question about funding women's entrepreneurial ventures. We know that, big, fantastic, positive news. It's now 2.7% of all VC venture capital funding is going to women-led businesses, up from 2%. So yay, 2.7%. So some of my colleagues said, well, the Silicon Valley excuse or the downtown Toronto venture capital space excuse is that, well, women aren't proposing very high quality businesses, so we would fund them if they were good businesses. So what they did is they created a business plan, and they created a script that would describe it, kind of a pitch for a new business. And they recorded the business plan in a video with the pitch being narrated. And in some cases, they narrated it with a man's voice, and in some cases, they narrated it with a woman's voice. The pitch is the same, the financials are the same, the technology is the same, every single word said by the person is identical. And yet when you then asked investors, which is the business you would like to invest in, it turns out the one with the man's voice is twice as investable as the woman's voice. So Then you say, well, maybe they're imagining the woman's going to get pregnant, have a baby, not going to be committed, and all that stuff that they think that somehow women who have children are not committed to their jobs as opposed to actually being more committed to their jobs. But okay, let's imagine that people are thinking that, and somehow also imagine that men don't want to take any time with their children and aren't going to be dedicated to their families. So another researcher said, let's get away from any of that, and we'll just have people work on computers. This is the last one here. You have a whole bunch of people work on a computer, you ask them, they do a whole bunch of tasks, you ask them how the computer performs, and everyone says the computers perform the same. Then you ask people, how much is this computer worth? Like, what would be the price if you had to buy it? Only some people were told that their computer's name was Julie, and some people were told that their computer's name was James. And it turns out James is more valuable than Julie for some reason. So this is to say, this idea that that it's just, we live in a meritocracy, and that if women were qualified, if people of color were qualified, if people with disabilities were qualified, they would get hired, or they would get entrepreneurial money, or they would get the opportunities. No, actually what we do have right now is not a meritocracy. What we have right now is an affirmative action system for straight white men. They are getting all of the opportunities relative to the level of quality that's being presented there. And so this idea, when people say, oh, we can't do it because we have a meritocracy, they're actually just defending a system of privilege that has been reinforcing their position in society. And I could go on. Okay, let me go to a second myth that's very related to this, which is about the pipeline. Everyone says, where are the women? We can't find the women. And then other people say, well, they choose to opt out. You know, they have families, they're not committed, they opt out. And so you see this leaky pipeline kind of metaphor that people have. Yes, we know that women are equally represented in the 3rd and 4th grade in terms of aptitude in math, but somehow they don't want to pursue technology careers or things like that later. They opt out. The research also says that this is not the case. Women are not necessarily opting out. We tell women, well, if you want to have these serious careers, you need to lean in. But what we know is that when women lean in, they get pushed back because the system is not designed to find women leaning in very appealing. I just the other day got told I need coaching. Why do I need coaching? None of my other colleagues, many of whom are also assertive, have been asked to get coaching. Why am I getting asked to get coaching? Because I'm pushing to get things done, and that the system is not designed to want me to do that. In fact, the system is designed to tell me I need coaching to get me to quiet down and not really push on things so much. Well, too bad. I'm just going to keep pushing, and that's just the way it is. But nonetheless, there's a double bind, and the research shows that there is, that you can't just tell women to lean in, because if you don't change the system, leaning in is actually going to create more disadvantage for them. And so what I think is going on is that we're confusing what we call supply effects for demand effects. So we say there's no supply of women. We can't find them for leadership jobs or other kinds of things, but in fact, what the problem is that organizations are making it so hostile for women to operate that it's not that women aren't supplying themselves, it's that organizations really aren't demanding what they want. And so, but we blame it on the women, and then we tell them they need to lean in, or they need to have more, be more risk-seeking, more risk-taking, and things like that. But we're confusing the nature of the effect, and there's a whole bunch of academic research that's designed to help us think about that. So what the research actually says is that women are not opting out. They're actually being pushed out of the system. And then people in the system say we can't find the women without taking any ownership or responsibility for creating that problem to begin with. Okay, so I made a little note to myself about what I wanted to say about this slide, because this picture of this man makes me so angry. So these myths about meritocracy and these myths about women opting out are actually perpetuated by the people in positions of privilege. So this is a picture of James Damore. You got covered a lot in the press. He is a former employee of Google. He's former because he wrote this memo that basically said, oh, all this stuff pushing to have women in technology roles is just compromising quality. It's this PC stuff, and it's making our products worse. And so it's this idea that somehow there's this, that women or any other underrepresented minority is compromising quality. Well, I can actually tell you from the academic research that when you have quotas, you actually increase quality. Why? Because you're giving a whole bunch of people who normally don't get considered for these kinds of roles for all the reasons I showed you before, who get considered for the roles because they actually are qualified. And some people who maybe got some advantages had those tailwinds pushing them along, not that they didn't work hard, not that they weren't trying, but everyone's working hard and everyone's trying. Those people are potentially not getting the opportunities. And so what I have concluded is, and this relates to a quote that is around on the internet these days, when you're accustomed to privilege, equality feels like oppression. What I think is going on, what we're seeing right now, this backlash, those statistics that I told you about, that report that came out today, says not only is it 9 of 10 people have some bias against women's equal opportunity, but that statistic is getting worse over time. Over the last decade, it's getting worse. We're seeing a backlash, and I think in part we're seeing a backlash because we are trying to push for equality, and what we're getting is people who have historically had a lot of privilege suddenly not experiencing the same level of privilege, having to face the same challenges as everyone else, and they push back. So I think that that's actually what's going on, and the research would really enforce that notion. One way that people respond is to say, oh, people are pushing back, I'm kind of worried, let's make sure we make the business case for diversity. You see this all the time. My former employer, McKinsey, making the business case for diversity, everyone making the business case for diversity. It turns out it doesn't work, because we've been making it for like 15, 20 years, and you've seen that the progress isn't fast enough. And yet we feel this constant pressure to make the business case. So I just have a piece out in Fast Company a couple of weeks ago that talked about how making the business case is actually pretty damaging, because it actually makes, like, do I really want a business case made for me? That's kind of othering, right? It kind of makes me feel like I'm that other thing that you have to make the business case for to have the right to be included. So women or people of color have to be better than the status quo in order to even be included in the conversation. And I think that that's highly problematic. So I don't think the answer is the business case for diversity. I think we need to go right back to the social justice case, the affirmative action case. The whole reason the business case wrote up, and what I say in this article, is that in the 1980s, with the rise of Ronald Reagan, there was this big movement to push against affirmative action and to kind of demonize that. And so people then turned to these business case arguments, but it turns out that they're not particularly effective. Instead, what I think is effective is hard work. So this is a quote from an article in Scientific American that I highly recommend to all of you. It is by the late, great Kathy Phillips, who just passed away very untimely at the age of 47 this year, former senior vice dean at the Columbia Business School, one of the heroes in the academic space in terms of research on diversity and inclusion. And what she talks about is that diversity, what makes it work, when we talk about, the benefits of diversity, creativity, all those wonderful team outcomes, is because we're doing hard work, because we're getting uncomfortable, because we're actually trying to understand each other and make a difference. And so what she says is, this is how diversity works: by promoting hard work and creativity, by encouraging the consideration of alternatives. The pain associated with diversity can be thought of as the pain of exercise. You have to push yourself to grow your muscles. The pain produces the gain. No pain, no gain. So the way I've been thinking about it lately is that, and no offense to this event, because this event is great, but we have a lot of events about women in leadership. We have a lot of events. Downtown Toronto loves events. They love logos, they love events, they love celebrations. And celebrations and logos events are great, but to me, that's a little bit like buying the gym membership. If you need to exercise your muscles, right? Buy the gym membership. Are you just gonna walk around with a pin on that says, I'm a member of the gym? No, you're gonna actually go to the gym and work out, right? I mean, that would be the goal. I think some people do just buy the gym membership, but these events are the entry point. It's the buying of the gym membership. But if you actually want to do this diversity inclusion, you have to do the work. You have to change your organizations. You have to stand up for people. You have to fight for things. You have to change your recruiting processes. You have to create other opportunities. You have to tell different stories. I mean, the CBC is fantastic at telling stories of such a wide, diverse group of Canadians, but that's what we have to do. We have to actually not just buy the gym membership, we have to go to the gym. And so what I have been advocated, and then I want to open it up for questions from you. I have no idea what the time is, because I just start blabbing and I get excited, and that's because I'm impatient and I'm in a bad mood. So my conclusion is something that I've been writing about a lot and thinking about, because I'm not actually a gender scholar. I have only been doing this gender work for the last 4 or 5 years, and I started the Institute for Gender and the Economy only 3 years ago. I'm an innovation scholar. I had always been thinking about how companies can be more innovative. And I realized when I kind of woke up in 2016 and realized how little change had been made, that maybe we can apply that innovation model to understanding the gender equality challenge. If we work as hard on gender equality as we work on creating innovative new programs or innovative new investigations or things like that, then maybe we would be able to make progress. So I wrote this in 2017 because this 2017 Gender Equality is Innovation Challenge after the Prime Minister's, because his 2015 justification of why he had a gender-balanced leadership team. Every year I have to cross out the 17. Just recently I had to cross out my 19 and put in a 20. I'm hoping at some point not to have to keep crossing out these numbers, because we will have actually gotten somewhere. And I really encourage you, I hope that today this event is your purchasing of the gym membership, but that you're going to commit yourselves to actually moving forward, to actually making real change. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and to interact with you. So thanks a lot. Hey, okay.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was fascinating. I just love how you put your whole thesis forward in terms of research and evidence and hard facts.
Thanks.
I have so many questions myself, but we want to open it up to the audience. So if you have any questions, please feel free, come to the mic. I also want to tell people who are watching online that you can put your questions on I.O. I.O. is our internal online communication system, so please feel free to do that. And we have a woman here who has a question.
Great.
Is this on? Is it on? Can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah,
okay.
Go ahead.
I noticed that you discussed intersectionality for a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us know that as far as the wage gap goes, as far as gender parity goes, et cetera, a lot of these issues more deeply impact women of color, women with disabilities, that sort of thing. So I'm wondering, what actionable steps do you take to make sure that your feminism is intersectional, and any other advice that you might be able to give?
Yeah, because if we just do feminism for white ladies, it's really not good. And I think that's a lot of what we've done. And there's a lot of, I follow tons of black women feminists on Twitter. I also follow a lot of disability rights people on Twitter. Twitter can be a toxic space, but it can also be a space to really push your thinking. So personally, what I do is I invest heavily every single day in reading and making sure, educating myself, being in conversation with people who are not like me. I also really try to make it a practice of whenever I get asked to do an event, I always ask who else is on the panel. And I have turned down several different events lately that were all white because I've had people yell at me for turning them down. But I just say, look, I can't do the work that I'm doing and think it's okay to have a whole bunch of white people talking about inequality issues. So I'm fighting in my own little way. I'm working on the research that we promote and sponsor to make sure that we're talking very heavily about that. But it is a massive issue. I think everywhere that when we talk about women's equality, we are not paying attention to people, to women of color, women with disabilities, Indigenous women. It's certainly the case here in Canada too. So I'm just trying to double down all my efforts to make sure every single time I make a decision, I have that in mind, and I think we all have to too. But I'm a white person, so I have that privilege, and so for me, it's really a matter of making sure I'm checking that privilege all the time. But I would love to hear at some point, maybe we can talk offline, things you think I could be doing, so.
Thank
But
you.
it's an important question.
Thank
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
I think you have to go to the mic if you're going to ask a question, so lining up. Go for it.
Thank you, Sarah. My question is on allyship. So
Yeah.
as an ally, how can I do the workout instead of just getting the
Yeah.
membership?
Yeah, so I want to say two things about that. First of all, a lot of times we put men in the position of allyship, right? Oh, you can be an ally to women, and that's for sure true. It's also true that all of us can be allies, right? Like I hosted an event for LGBTQ inclusion, and one of the men who was up there said, how many of you are allies? And only the heterosexual people raised their hands. And he said, trick question, we all can be allies. So all of us can be allies for each other. So there's lots that men can do. For example, calling it out when people says, oh, gee, she kind of has sharp elbows. Does she really have that presence? You know, that kind of stuff, like calling it out right away. Or, you know, we know there's still a lot of bad behavior, finding a way to get people to not do that. Sometimes it means giving up your opportunity. You get asked to be on a panel, or you get asked to do an event, or you get asked to do something that would be good for your career, but you know that there's someone else who's being overlooked. Sometimes it means literally, it's not, if you're an ally and it never costs you anything, then it's not really allyship. It has to have some kind of cost. The other thing I would say is a way to be an ally is to actually be an ally for new forms of masculinity as well. Because one of the reasons we're in this problem is because we still expect women to do the majority of care work and men should be more career-oriented. And if we got to the point where men and women were equally sharing the unpaid care work, I just saw an article today, the value of women's unpaid labor around the world is like 10.9, and then there's like 25 zeros after that. I don't even remember what illion it is, if it's non-illion or bazillion. But anyway, there's a lot of work that women are doing that's unpaid that we don't recognize as valuable for our economy, but is incredibly valuable. And if that were more equally shared, then that would create more equality at work. So we have a long road to go for men's equality too, in terms of thinking about different norms of masculinity. So I think that there's lots of ways. So thank you very much for being here. Thanks. Next question. Hi.
My question kind of has two parts.
You might need to speak up. Radio voice.
My question kind of has two parts. You actually kind of touched on that right now. I don't know if you actually mentioned it, but my question is, why haven't we made any true, real progress? And possibly could it be also that, you know, part of that whole pull, like leading in thing is that we've kind of made women believe that you can't really reach those levels. Like we kind of, like those questions where you were comparing men and women, how many of those people who responded to those surveys were actually women themselves that wouldn't trust their own?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so first of all, women are just as biased as men. This is not men think women aren't valuable and women somehow are magic. No, we're all biased. The whole system is, because we're in a biased system, right? We're in a system that expects certain, you know, caregiving from women. There was a really interesting book by Gemma Hartley called Fed Up, where she talked about the fact that, you know, like let's say you share equally care work at home, but the guy is just more relaxed about how clean the house is or whether the kid goes to school with stains on his or her shirt, right? So, but what she said is the problem is we have different expectations. So if the house is dirty, people don't say to the man, oh, tis, tis, you didn't clean your house. They immediately look at the woman. And of course, I'm talking about heterosexual couples here. I have a female partner, which is awesome because there's no like gender norms about who's supposed to be doing the cooking or cleaning, even though everyone asks us, you know, well, who does the laundry? Like they want to know who's the boy, right? And I'm like, no, we're just like, that's the cool part about being in a gender equal relationship is that someone doesn't do the laundry. But nonetheless, there's a lot of critique that goes to women if men don't also agree to have equal kind of standards. And so I think one of the things that's really holding us back is those sets of expectations, but then they get embedded in all sorts of different choices. And so if I'm hiring and I have two people, one who's a woman and one who's a man, and they're both 26, I might be worried that the 26-year-old woman is going to take a year-long mat leave. I come from the States where you take 4 minutes of mat leave, but like in Canada, you know, my new country, you can take up a year or even more. if the man isn't also going to be taking mat leave, or parental leave, then we are going to have different expectations, and we're going to see the man as more productive. And so I think that there's a lot that goes down to those expectations about home life that are holding us back, and why I think that the progress has been slow. And there's like 9 trillion other reasons why the progress has been slow, so I won't go into all of them now, but it's a lot that we have to do. So thank you. I see more people lining up.
Hi there.
Hi.
I just wanted to ask, what kind of suggestion can you give in terms of how to change the circumstance? What can we do on the daily to lean in?
Right. How to change the situation? Well, so it's a million things, right? There's not like, everyone asks me, okay, what's the one thing I can do? And they're very frustrated with me when I say, well, it's at least 1,000 and maybe more, right? So there's a lot of changes that we need to make if we're gonna do it. Satish Rai, who's at OMERS, was at a panel a few years ago at the Rotman School talking about what they had done to achieve greater equality in their organization, and someone asked him the same question. He says, we did 1,000 things. So what does it mean? You have to think about your recruiting processes. You have to think about your promotion processes. You have to think about, when you're thinking about that next person who's going to be heading a show or being the producer of a show or something like that, you need to make sure that you've actually considered, really thought hard and looked hard for those people, taking the extra time. Sometimes doing a search takes more time if you have to expand out of your network. You need to champion each other. One of the most effective things you can do as a person is not fix yourself, but champion someone else. So if you hear about an opportunity, you're talking to your boss, you can say, oh, you know who would be really great for that role? I don't know if you knew that she does X, Y, and Z. So there's a lot that you can personally do to champion other people, but also to push the organization to say, okay, when we're doing this recruiting, what is the process that we're going to do to make sure that we have, for example, reached out into the Indigenous community to make sure that we have Indigenous job candidates for this role? So there's a lot of questions that you can ask about the process that I think, from your standpoint, could be helpful things to do. So that's a start. There's many more, but yeah, thanks. Hi.
Hello, and thank you for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I volunteer with an organization called Next Gen Men, and it's all about creating healthy masculinity.
I know them.
Oh, good, I'm glad. So it's one of those what can we do questions, but you know, when I think about what did I do as a mother to change gender norms or in my household, and I mean, I had Barbie dolls, I had all of those things in spite of a desire not to. So I'm looking for some magic bullets.
Parenting advice.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm not a parent, so I'm literally the worst person. And kids, like, I really like them for extremely short periods of time. But what do we know? I'll tell you what we know from a research standpoint so that I don't have to comment on my bad kind of godmothering and aunting skills. So we know from the research that girls get lower allowance on average than boys. We know that girls are expected to do much more housework care around the house in terms of their chores than boys. We also know that, I just said that in a very binary way, and we're just learning, I think, in our society how to respect the gender identities of our children in a broader way. So yeah, it's extremely hard. My sister, like, I'm the sellout corporate type in my family. Everyone else is like way more to the left, like chain myself in front of a tunnel to protest kind of to the left. And so my sister, who had a kid, super feminist, and she's like, her kid is, you know, born as a girl. She was like, I'm going to be super feminist. We're not going to give them any of this stuff. And it turns out, what does this kid want? Twirly lavender skirts and sparkles, right? Some things you can't help because of the society that we're in. So that's why there's the hashtag Let Toys Be Toys movement and other things that are, you know, kids' clothes, all that kinds of stuff. There's lots of things we can do in the household. There's lots of things that can be done at school. We know that teachers often don't call on girls as much when it comes to math and science subjects. So there's a lot of things that we can do growing up. But what I want to say is that everyone wants to default to that. Oh, well, we need to fix home life and education. But we can fix a lot in our jobs and in our corporations now, because you can't, if you don't fix the careers and spaces that people are going into, then young girls and boys and kids of all genders are not going to be able to aspire to those roles. So I don't want to abdicate our responsibility just to family life without understanding we can fix a lot in our own jobs. We still have time for more?
Yeah.
Go for it.
Thank you very much. I am a woman engineer, so I'm very underrepresented in our profession. About 11% maybe, the women engineers. So my question pertains to lack of like a common, unified front who would represent women's professionals, who would be the enabler of the changes for the women who are overqualified, underpaid, and overloaded with responsibilities.
So why isn't there a more unified front?
Correct.
For Canada. So this is, I'm going to say the word patriarchy, because that's what we live in. This is the patriarchy at work. It makes us think that this is our individual problem, like, oh, you need more skills, or you need to lean in, or you do that. It makes it, individualizes it so that you don't band together. That is the patriarchy at work that is keeping us from banding together. So we should do more advocacy. We also know in a lot of situations, for example, when it comes to gender wage gap, the gender wage gap is tighter in unionized environments. Why? Because unions are advocating on behalf of workers to a certain extent. Now, it doesn't close, so it's still a problem. So what I would say is, these are the kinds of things we should be doing. So employee resource groups inside companies where women get together can be a very powerful mechanism for advocating for change. And a lot of people treat an employee resource group as a chance to network. I think that that's the place where you come up with your demands and then you go to the CEO and you say, here's our demands from this employee resource group, right? Yeah. Like, it's not a networking. And that's part of the patriarchy too, is to just tell you to network amongst yourselves. You need to use it as a platform to actually make change. So that's what I would say. But the system is designed to make us think that we shouldn't be doing that and that it's our own problem. So, yeah, okay.
We have time for one more question.
Okay, last question.
Hi, it's a very quick question, but it's broken in two because you said you were not against quotas, and but you don't know if we should bring out affirmative actions at work, for example. And my second part of a question is, we are now going beyond the #MeToo era, but we still do have a system that encourage toxic masculinity at work.
Yes.
So, for example, there aren't like mini screening at the level of recruitment to know if somebody is bringing in the toxic masculinity at work. But we also have women turning a blind eye at work, saying, I'm not like directly touched by this problem, so I don't know how to face it in another way. So what would you say are the actionable things that we can do to prevent having toxic masculinity at work?
Right, okay, two massively huge questions. So first, I am for quotas and affirmative action. I think all they do is level the playing field. There's no advantage there. All it is leveling the playing field. So I've written a Globe and Mail op-ed basically saying we need to do this. So I'm for that because everyone thinks that it's unfair. It's actually the fairest thing we could do. So there's my statement recorded. So on that, because I think that's the only way, the systems that I've been talking about are so entrenched that the only way we are going to overcome them is with something like a quota or affirmative action. People's goodwill, if we could rely on people's goodwill, we would have gender equality by now. So we haven't. Okay, toxic masculinity. It is never the case that if you are a woman who you yourself are not experiencing sexual harassment, that it isn't affecting you. It is affecting you. It's affecting how much you get paid. It's affecting whether you're going to advance in your careers. It affects you in so many ways. So everyone is affected by this. Next Gen Men, who was mentioned earlier, we're actually working very hard with our students at the Rotman School. We're having Jake Stika from Next Gen Men come in and have a men's only dialogue and conversation about what does it mean to be a man at work. And I have become increasingly convinced that we cannot fix the problem for women if we don't fix the problem for men. So for example, I started working in 1986. You could only wear skirt suits. I have like literally nerve damage on my legs from wearing pantyhose in New York City, in the middle of winter. So now women can wear skirt suits and pantsuits. Men still pretty much stuck with the pantsuit, right, if they're going to wear a suit. But you know what I mean? It's a metaphor for the fact that we have spent the last 30 years trying to open up possibilities for women we have not equally opened up possibilities for men, and until we do that, we are never going to be able to make the full progress. So that may be a good place to end that part of the conversation. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you. Thank you very much to everybody who came up and asked questions. Thank you so much to Professor Sarah Kaplan from the University of Toronto. And I think we're just going to move on. Thanks so much for coming out today.
Thanks. Hi. You want me? Am I still on? Am I still on?
Yeah, tuck it in.
Yeah, maybe I do now. It's a little dry.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. It's lovely to see such a large and mixed group of people here for our celebration here of International Women's Day. I'm Manjula Selvaraja. I'm a technology columnist with CBC Radio. I have to say, before we start this incredible panel, I have to applaud two of the organizers of this event for curating such an excellent panel, and that will be Visible Women and Women in Technology at CBC, who do fantastic work here. Let's give them a hand. Now, I know that you're not here to listen to me. I know that you're very excited about the panelists that we have lined up and the conversation we're about to have, so let's get it started. I'm going to introduce them now. We're going to start with Krista Couture. She's an award-winning performing and recording artist, nonfiction writer, and broadcaster. She's been very busy. Her 7th recording, Safe Harbor, is coming out on Coke's Records in March. Her debut nonfiction book, How to Lose Everything, is slated for publication this September. Krista is midday host on Toronto's 106.5 Element FM. She's also proudly Indigenous, queer, disabled, and a mom. Let's have her up here.
I'm next. Okay, good, thanks.
Our next panelist, you just heard her, but deserving. That was a fantastic talk by Sarah Kaplan. I'll introduce her again. She's the director of the Institute for Gender and the Economy, a distinguished professor at the University of Toronto's Rodman School of Management. She's author of the business bestseller,
Oh, you don't
Creative
need to say all
Destruction.
that again. You don't.
Oh,
they
no,
heard it.
no.
Okay.
Hey,
Okay.
who's got the mic?
Me too, apparently.
Oh, that's right, that's right. Okay. And the 360-degree corporation, from stakeholder trade-offs to transformation. She's a senior fellow at the Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania, and a McKinsey & Company consultant. And now I'd like to call up our third panelist, Christine Song. She's a strategic partner at Big Win Group, focused on executive retained search, and chief people officer for Chef Hero, an early-stage food tech startup. That's fascinating, Christine. Christine has over 15 years of experience recruiting and growing people in diverse industries, from large corporations to early-stage startups. She's a certified human resources leader, sits on the advisory board of BioConnect, and is co-organizer for Disrupt HR Vaughan. Our next speaker is Jody Kovitz. Hi, Jody.
Hello.
She is founder and CEO of Move the Dial, a global movement and organization to advance the participation and leadership of all women in technology. She's been named twice as one of Canada's top 100 most powerful women, a top 25 women of influence in Canada, and a Toronto Adweek brand star. Jody's first book is coming out this year, by my bedside right now. Go Out of Your Way, How One Small Act Can Move the Dial in Life and Business, which was endorsed by Sheryl Sandberg. Thank you for being here, Jody. And our fifth speaker is Caroline De Silva. She's a Senior Director of Enterprise Loyalty Finance at Loblaw, supporting the loyalty group and retail companies at Loblaw. Her career began in consumer packaged goods in corporate planning before a long tenure at Shoppers Drug Mart. I have to add this because we were talking at the back. She is a proud mother of two, an ardent Raptors fan from the very beginning. She didn't jump on the bandwagon like I did. She's an actual, true Raptors fan. Let's give them all a hand. Okay, I'm gonna start on a hopeful note. And everyone does, Thank you. I'm going to start with you, Krista. What are some profound moments of change that you've seen around you over the last year that give you hope?
Yeah, sometimes it can be hard to feel hopeful, but I think we can't, look at powerful change in the last few years and not mention the Me Too movement, of course. And for myself, because I primarily work in Indigenous arts and Indigenous media, I right now feel a lot of hope thanks to the young women at the front lines of the Wet'suwet'en solidarity actions, particularly in BC. It's not a workplace thing, but just the fact that these young women are stepping into influence in all areas gives me enormous hope.
Sarah?
Well, of course, the title of my talk was I'm impatient and in a bad mood, so I'm not sure that I have, but I would say the same thing. I would say there's another, I don't want to lay this off on the next generation because that's just abdicating our responsibility, because everyone said that about my generation 30 years ago. But I think seeing the powerful voices of young women around environmental change and things like that and getting really listened to is, I think is, they're just taking their place at the table and demanding it, and I think that that's really wonderful to see.
Christine.
Yeah, I agree. Particularly working in the tech industry, I do see a lot of changes happening, not as quickly as we would like it to happen, but I'm seeing more confident women sitting at the table, owning it, and younger men that are very accepting of that. This is kind of like, this is all they've known. And it's a big difference. I'm Generation X. I've seen the older generation, and I'm also part of the newer generation of millennials that are coming into this workforce, and I am seeing a more positive change. We just got to keep going.
Jody?
Yeah, I'm feeling really optimistic in terms of what I've seen in the last, even the change from 3 years ago to now in the partners we're working with. I'm seeing leaders that are prepared to be bolder and actually invest in the work that needs to be done, which is different than what I observed as a newbie to the work. And I also am starting to see a lot of the technology companies that we're working with take a much more intersectional approach, sort of at least beginning to understand that people have over 30 different components of their identities, and we're not just talking about gender in the same way anymore. So that's really exciting to me, and I'm really hopeful for what will happen as a result of that in the next 10 years.
Caroline?
So I'm going to take this in a bit of a different direction. As you mentioned off the top that I'm a huge Raptors fan, so I've been a big sports nut like my whole life, and so it's very obvious to me that there is a huge gender gap in professional sports. So how much women are paid versus their male counterparts. And one thing that's super hopeful from my perspective is that in January, the WNBA actually announced their new collective bargaining agreement. And it is honestly like life-changing for many of these women. And it's a new standard really for all professional sports where women are concerned. And so it structurally aligns like how men are compensated. And so even though the dollars are not the same, the structure is there that it can get closer like as the league grows. And so for me, that's like a huge step forward and something that has always been like predominantly male. And people are very passionate about why men should earn more. And I think it will now, you'll see it kind of be used as the standard for both hockey and soccer and all of these huge leagues where women feel like they've always been like underpaid and underrepresented.
Thank you. So let's get a lay of the land. And this is a question, perhaps I'll start with you, Jody, and Sarah, I'm going to get you to pipe in on this as well. I know the theme for International Women's Day this year is Each for Equal. What are the indicators that tell you that things aren't equal for women in the workforce?
Well, that's a really big question, my friend.
In 2 minutes or less.
I'm sure that Sarah has a lot to say about that. And I'll just offer, I don't think we can stop talking about pay equity. I mean, just picking up on what you just said, we still have a very long way to go. A recent example that I look to a lot is the example of Salesforce as a technology company where there is a leader who listened to folks who happen to be women who came to him and said there's a serious pay equity problem at Salesforce. And he said, that's not possible. No way. We have such bold values here. And then when he looked under the hood, there was a serious pay gap problem. he righted the ship, which cost millions of dollars, and he's had to do it again multiple times because every time a year goes by or they acquire another company, the creep in pay equity demonstrates that, like, for all the progress, of course, that we're making, you know, we have a very long way to go, and that's just one indicator of, you know, of where we have to go in terms of the gaps that are there. But I think there's a tremendous example to be learned from that leadership, where you are prepared to actually look under the hood and prepared to be transparent and open about it and prepared to invest in fixing it immediately. And that's the kind of leadership that I think we can look to and learn a lot from as we start to take some steps. I could say a million more things, but I'll defer to my very esteemed colleague who knows tons about this.
Well, I already spoke a lot, but I'll just say it's pretty much any measure you could think of, right?
Everything.
Women in leadership, women in tech, gender-based violence, women are much more likely to retire in poverty, the gender norm study that I just talked about. So on almost every dimension, we're seeing problems. Now, of course, women are graduating from law school and medical school at equal rates to men, but then when you look at elite medicine and you look at elite law firms, you don't see it. So there's, no matter where you go, even where we've made progress, we still don't see progresses for the people who hold the reins. And we're definitely not seeing progress for people in the lower socioeconomic classes and you know, women of color. If you look at the horrible conditions for people who work as housekeepers in hotels and things like that. So it's an infinite list.
And I will just say, this is terrible, as a plug for CBC's work, there's an incredible series that's rolling out across the country on intimate partner violence that I am reading and has been incredibly informational, so I'll just put that out there. And I'll take this to, let's get a little bit personal as to what people are hearing from their networks. Caroline, I'll start with you. Christine, I want you to weigh in as well. Caroline, Christine, both of you lead women. Some of the people that report into you are women, people in your networks, people, vendors. You interface with a lot of women. What are they telling you, sort of in that one-to-one situations? What are you hearing from them about the challenges and the barriers that they face in the workplace?
So I thought quite a bit about this, and two things really jumped out for me in kind of what I've heard over the last couple of years in talking to, like, my friends and some of my colleagues. One of them is around, you know, when opportunities come up in the business, whatever type of industry it may be, that they don't always feel like it's based on merit. And so Sarah just talked about this, that opportunities sometimes go to people, and when they sit back and think about, like, oh, is that, like, the best choice or what that choice was premised on, that they don't always feel like it was based on merit, that it was based on relationships or other things. That was one. And the second one was around self-advocacy, where women feel like, unlike their male counterparts, they're not walking into somewhere and saying, hey, I want this. Or if they're presented with an opportunity, they don't feel empowered to say, you know what, that's a great opportunity, but, like, it would be much more attainable if we did this, this, and this. And then the back end of that, as things kind of play out, is that then they feel like they're in a situation where they're helpless because they've lost that chance where they could have requested something that would have made a difference.
The ask moment.
Yeah.
For myself, I work in HR, so I do a lot of recruitment, and particularly in engineering, we all know that engineers are in demand, and there's not enough of them to go around. I've seen a lot of engineer men come into the role, and they demand a certain salary, and typically they'll get it. And then typically I'll find women come in who are also engineers asking for considerably less, and I mean like $20,000, $30,000 less. And I always talk to the hiring manager and I say, what's going on? Like, how is it that this person doesn't understand that, you know, their salary should be at a certain level? We know what it's like in Toronto, and they can't explain it. I think there's this way the world has evolved where women just don't feel comfortable or confident enough to ask for what they feel they deserve. And this is the whole problem that we see in terms of pay equity. And it is disturbing. Typically when I go through an interview, what I say to candidates is, okay, that's good, that's what you want, but we're gonna pay what this role is valued at. We have this range, and based on your experience, we're gonna give you what you want. And people kind of get surprised by that, particularly women, because they don't expect an answer like that. And I feel like we need to all think openly that way. It can't just be the HR lady that's doing that because it's the right thing to do. It has to be the hiring managers, it has to be the CEO, it has to be the CFO that builds the budget. It has to work for all of us.
Krista, you work across so many spaces. You network with such a wide variety of people, probably because you do a lot. Right?
Master
You write,
of none.
you record. What are you hearing about the unique challenges that are faced by Indigenous women and people with disabilities?
I see something similar in both groups in the spaces I work, and that is just a basic understanding of what barriers are in place and what accommodation could look like, just to even get us in the building. I recently went to a work event. I looked up the venue beforehand, and on the website it had a statement about, all are welcome, all genders are welcome, all races, all sexual orientations. It's a scent-free environment, social justice mandate. I thought, great, I'm really looking forward to this. I got there, and it was up 2 flights of stairs, and there was no other way in, and so I couldn't go. And so this is a place that had, put effort into offering an equal opportunity and just had a huge oversight to, first of all, not be an accessible space, but not even let people know. And kind of similarly for Indigenous spaces, I work with a two-spirit arts collective here in Toronto called Blue Jays Dancing Together. We were in conversations with a funder about some access funds, and this was for mental health supports. And we had put a traditional healer in our budget, and we're told that was not an eligible expense. And so then we had to question, well, then what is your definition of health? Whose definition is that? Whose health, whose body are you talking about? Because it doesn't include us if this is not part of health. And so those are examples of where, especially with disability, 25% of the population has a disability. And if we can't physically get in the building, we just don't even have a starting point. And I think with the Indigenous, that was between a group and an organization, but even as individuals, and we enter a workplace, and there's just such a lack of understanding about cultural differences that it's hard to, it affects everything.
Now, Sarah, I've heard you speak about this. I find this research really fascinating. I think you might have talked about it a bit before, too. The idea of the double bind that women face as they climb the corporate ladder. There might be people here that may not have heard of it, even if you've referenced it before. Can you kind of explain what that is and talk about some of the research around it?
Well, I think the research basically suggests that we want to encourage women to take leadership roles or ask for those salaries or things like that, but not everyone is socialized to think that that's very palatable. And so the double bind is this, you want women to step up, but when they step up, they're seen as unpleasant, unlikable, apparently unelectable, looking at my home country. How we ended up with 2 80-year-old white dudes as the Democratic nominees is beyond me. So that's kind of the double bind. And what the research suggests is that, when you have a woman we have some colleagues doing this work right now, when you have a woman applying for a job that's in a male-dominated field, she might take off some of the things on her resume that might be more like I was the head of my sorority or things like that that would signal gender. And it turns out that the women who kind of gender neutralize their resumes actually are less likely to get hired even in the male-dominated fields because people expect women to have feminine characteristics just as they also expect them to not have feminine characteristics. So it's a very complicated space to navigate because you can't just act like a man because that's seen as unpleasant, but then when you act too much like a woman, you're too much like a woman. So that's the double bind.
So it's this idea that you actually almost wear like a different skin depending on the room or the particular thing you're doing.
Right, well, that's why a lot of the research on authenticity doesn't necessarily apply to women because it's who gets to define what authentic is. Everyone says, be your authentic self at work, but you can't be your authentic self at work when you're a woman always, or a person with a disability, or a person of color. I mean, if you Google professional hairstyles, you get straight hair. If you Google unprofessional hairstyles, you get curly hair, or the hair that would be typically associated with an African American or something like that. So, we have a long way to go in terms of those expectations.
Christine, and now let's talk about that climbing the ladder. You help organizations hire and retain people. I'm sure you've heard the gamut of things, but you've also seen people who work to get to leadership roles and then exit the roles, exit the industry. Why do you think women leave?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You know, working in the executive level, I'm typically with one, maybe another female executive, and the majority of the team would be mostly male. I've talked to a few of these women that have decided to leave, and even looking at research, I think I saw a statistic that said women at the executive level leave 3 times more than men. And it's disappointing to see that, but when I hear the real stories and the conversations behind it, I hear things like, there's a lot of pressure. We have young children, and I don't get a lot of support at work. We don't have remote work, we don't have flexibility. My husband gets frowned upon if he stays home with sick children. It's always expected the wife's going to do it. So women have these incredible childcare duties. They've got executive jobs. They're also working 40, 50, 60 hours a week. And they also, research has proven that they also go home and spend the majority of their time with their children to look at school homework and things like that. So the pressure gets very difficult, and there's often the time where they say, I can't do it anymore, I've got to make a choice. Maybe I'll just step away and come back in a few years. That's another problem too. I was recently, this week, I was talking to a VP of finance who was saying that his wife had taken 2 years off, 2 years, to take care of her children, and she's ready to go back into the workforce. She's got a business degree, she's got a marketing leadership experience, but no one will hire her. They won't even give her a phone call. And I said, why is that? And he said, I think it's the gap on her resume. The gap itself says, oh, well, you know, she's been away for 2 years. She can't possibly catch up. That's an eternity. And it's the way we judge women in this way. How could 2 years make such a big difference that she should never work again? I look at stuff like that and I frown upon it, but I mean, the third thing that I've seen is I've actually seen environments where it's not conducive to a woman's success. I've seen women crying in bathrooms, leadership women crying in bathrooms. I've seen women dismissed because they fought back. They said things that, you know, the men on the team didn't like, the CEO didn't agree with. And when I see things like that, I think the whole lean in, be your authentic self, speak the truth, be a powerful woman, sometimes that goes against you. And unfortunately, depending on the environment that you work in, it may not help your career. I think it has a lot to do with who leads the organization and what kind of culture do they build. Jody, like you said with Mark Benioff at Salesforce, it really depends on who's at the top, who's going to promote this culture of inclusivity and hold people accountable to that. If you have, you know, inclusive policies, you've got to hold people accountable to it. And when someone is going against that, what are you going to do about that? Everyone's watching. So, I mean, these are the examples that I've seen personally working in the industry. And, you know, as we try to get better, I still find it a huge challenge.
Yeah.
Jody, I think you want to...
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of just to build on what you've said, you know, there's two things that I've seen companies that are, I can't say doing this work really well, this is lifetime work, but companies that, you know, I think have entered a new era of thinking very deeply about what the future looks like in this work, of advancing all women identified people. One, it's a clear mindset and commitment that we actually really care about what the future of our team looks like as a strategic business priority. It's not a little thing in the HR report. It's not about our annual report. It's not also a side hustle. And one of the things I've certainly observed, and I'm sure many of you in the room have observed, is that the work of championing inclusion initiatives fall to those that are the most marginalized folks that will put up their hands and go champion the work without a budget, without accountability, even if they do have a tiny little budget. Like maybe we can buy a ticket to an event, but we don't actually have any money to invest in developing a strategy. We don't have a human whose day job it is to do this work. We're not going to actually reward this human for achieving the milestones. And so companies that are actually making, and I'm not just talking about having a chief inclusion officer. Like, yes, many companies do have an inclusion team and an officer, and that's not necessarily where the work is getting done in the trenches. And so I see, you know, a lot of our partners where it is the most marginalized folks that are driving forward the work, and the ones that are ahead are the ones that are taking it very seriously and investing meaningfully in building a team to really change the landscape. The other piece is really building on something else that you said, which is it is really not enough to talk about, our targets for gender, and even if we're more evolved and we have targets that are way more inclusive than only taking a gender lens, what are we doing to build a culture where those people actually feel they can belong, capital B and small b, and the volume of microaggressions that are going on in companies that even say that they're getting it right, and even leaders who are highly evolved. I mean, even those of us doing the work have to be on a constant learning journey. So I really think sort of the future of that belonging work and how to retain those awesome women-identified folks we get really comes down to being very deeply learning from Sarah and others who really do this work to understand what we can do to build those cultures of belonging, capital B, small b.
So then let's turn that on its head now. You partner with companies to help them try to figure this out. So what can organizations do to empower women in their workplaces? And because you do work with technology companies a lot, I'm going to ask you, Krista, that we will come to you to kind of hear about the space arts, what organizations can do too. But Jody, we'll start off with you.
I mean, that's again a massive question and huge answers. But certainly some of the companies that I think are doing this well are actually putting money behind where their mouths are in terms of what they want to achieve. They're bringing in real experts that are seasoned people leaders who have spent lots of time in the trenches, understanding and building teams that look different, that enable not only sort of solving for pipeline issues of lack of women engineers, for example, but understand how do we actually change the leadership, the mindset from fulsome training, and I don't just mean sort of 10 years ago training, the future of what does bias, how does that manifest, and how do we actually want to be treating each other so that people are heard and listened to and welcome and can show up, if not their authentic selves, because I agree entirely that we're not in that realm of reality yet, but actually want to come to work and feel safe, even brave enough to be in this space and contribute ideas. Those are companies that are, I think, starting to enable the women-identified folks that they have to become, starting to feel more empowered and starting to attract more women that are at the top of their game in tech for sure, who want to be there. I also think companies are thinking through meaningfully what development paths can look like and how to develop people and bring them along and up into leadership roles in innovative ways through, sort of innovative mentorship, access to, real senior leaders, skill base, and also advancing based on potential, not just proven track record, which as much as we, leaning in doesn't really matter if nobody's going to welcome you to the table and give you a shot based on what you've demonstrated as your performance. So I have companies that we're working with that I think are starting to change what those numbers are, and that who's staying once they do promote women into more leadership roles are thinking deeply about that and getting that right.
Krista, would you like to weigh in on that in terms of changes that you think companies can make to empower women in their organization? I know it's a very broad.
It's broad. I mean, when I think about seeing change in organizations, I think about the difference between knowing and being. And to tackle our biases is we have to train and retrain muscles. So I can't take a one-day workshop on tennis and become a tennis player. It's going to take decades, years of working muscles for it to be a way of being. And I think, so it's a daunting task for an organization. And what I see more and more is in women and in gender marginalized folks, just when they're not seeing that change possible for themselves in organizations or seeing those opportunities, that they're creating something new. I think there is more and more capacity and support and success for entrepreneurs. I work with a label, as a musician, I work with a label called Coax Records. It was started by Ray Spoon, who's a non-binary artist, and after 20 years in the industry, not seeing a place for themselves, created a platform for themselves, and in turn, I've been able to invite other artists. And it's not just, a welcoming, warm space. It's a business, and it's an opportunity for success. And I'm a mom as well, and I have a 2-year-old. If this were an Indigenous-led event, I would have brought her with me. She probably would have been sitting on my lap the whole time, and no one would have looked twice. I see a huge difference between Indigenous and non-Indigenous spaces towards motherhood and families. Imagine Native, the film festival a couple years ago in 2017, I don't know about the last couple years because 2-year-old, but in 2017, 50% of their films were directed by women. And that's a remarkable statistic. It shouldn't be, but I don't think any other film festival can claim that, and that is a direct result of the industry adapting to the needs of women and mothers and families, and then you see it in the workplace and you see it in the opportunities. And so I think for me, in the arts, and I mean, it's one thing to start a label, I know you can't just leave your bank and start a new one, but what I'm seeing in my zones is, not trying to move the dial, but just like changing the channel, just creating something totally different.
Love that.
Jody, a new hashtag, change the channel.
No, don't change it. Keep doing that.
Will you hire me? So I'm sure some of you have heard of this, the World Economic Forum. It's a report from the World Economic Forum that says that it'll take another 99 years for us to get to gender parity globally. Okay, I think we might all need to do a collective sigh around this. So that's what it says, 99 years. So can I get this? Can I, on the count of 1, 2, 3, everyone just do a, so 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you. Because I remember reading that report. I think it came out in December. It was I would say slightly shocking, regardless of everything else that you hear in interviews. So Sarah, I'd like to start off with you, and anyone else can jump in here too. What can governments and policymakers do to push for change?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I spent a lot of time in Ottawa having that exact conversation. And I think it would be really useful for them to understand the mechanisms that are really underlying the challenges. So, for example, pay equity legislation is never going to close the gender wage gap, because most of the gender wage gap comes from women career switching at the time of the arrival of their first child. And so it's not that they're in the same job. It's not like I'm in the same job as a man and I'm being paid differently. Actually, that's true for me personally, but like in most cases, that's not what's going on, is that women are actually moving from the high profile, client-facing job or whatever it is to a back office job or part-time work or whatever, for all of the barriers that we've seen. And yet the government is over-indexing on pay equity. And I'm like, that's never gonna, we've had 30 years of pay equity in Ontario, and it's I think closed $30 million worth of pay. So I think what the government can do is really understand what the underlying mechanisms are, and make legislation that will actually effectively go for that. I also think that whether it's the federal government or the Ontario government, there's been a lot of focus on creating a regulation and then punishing, firms, just as an enforcement mechanism as opposed to a skill building. I think a lot of companies would do stuff if they just know how. Only 9% of workers are in large corporations over 500 employees. Everyone else is working in small firms, and yet we're doing nothing to support small firms with all these HR tasks that you're talking about. They don't have the people like you advocating. And so I think the government could spend a lot more time focusing on the 90% of people in the private sector who are employed in smaller firms and don't have the advantages of the kinds of skills that we're talking about here. So I wish the government were looking in a different direction, but they, just like the corporates, are interested in bright, shiny objects. Everyone wants events and things like that, but they don't want to do the hard work. They don't want to, we have the same muscle analogy. They don't want to do the work. They don't want to build the muscles. And yeah, you go to the gym, it's like, I have to go to the gym. But then you do it and you're like, I feel awesome. That's what we need. We need people to know that when they go to the gym, they're going to feel awesome afterwards.
Anyone else want to jump in on what governments can do?
Actually, it made me think about something. When new hires get, when they join an organization, they go through an orientation program or onboarding. And I remember I was working at one company, and one part of our onboarding, our HR staff said, I want to talk about microaggressions. And I went, what a great topic. So we did that, and we had all the new hires that would come in every week listening to this thing about microaggressions, which a lot of men had never heard about. They hadn't heard the term. And we gave some examples of what that looked like. And I remember one day my HR manager came to me and said, wow, we had somebody that was like really disturbed by the whole session. I said, why is that? And she goes, well, it was this guy, and throughout the whole session, he was like really angry hearing about this. And afterwards, she said, what should I do about that? And I said, well, you should go talk to him. Why don't you go ask him why he was actually angry? And she said, that's actually a good idea. So she went up to him and said, I noticed that you were visibly agitated when I was talking about this, and I wanted to inquire why. And he said, well, I just don't think that this is something that's necessary in the workplace. I've got my hard skills, and I'm coming here to code, and I don't need to hear about, microaggressions or things like that. Why are you teaching us this stuff at our onboarding? And she said, because this is our culture, and it's the kind of culture that we want to create, a positive environment for everybody. And we want people to understand, particularly when they're joining the company, that there's certain things that we won't stand for, and we want to create an open, inclusive environment. And he just kind of shrugged. And I thought, you know what if there was a policy that the government could mandate where I believe like education is the key. There's a lot of, biases where maybe men don't want to behave a certain way, but they do because they just didn't know any better. Or it's the same thing with, diversity. Like we just need to educate ourselves a little more. So what if there was a policy where every workplace had to go through, inclusion practices and mandatory training? And I've talked to many CEOs and founders of companies that said, I just didn't know about this stuff, and I never had time to go through training. So while they would allow HR to do a diversity training program, you didn't see a lot of the executives or the CEO sitting in that training. So what if it was mandatory?
So I should add on that note that it just came to mind as Sarah said that she was in Ottawa. I believe, Sarah, you are now a Canadian citizen very recently. Is that right?
Yeah.
So, well, let's give her a hand for that. That means this country has a new force to reckon with.
Very emotional for me, actually. I'm very, very, very proud to be a Canadian citizen. So, yeah, thank you.
And I think before we get to the Q&A, because I know that people want to ask questions, Caroline, Krista, I thought that, we've talked about systemic changes. Let's look inwards. Let's look at ourselves for a moment. What do you think women can do to move the dial for themselves?
Yes, I can take that one first. I started off in one of my earlier kind of thoughts talking about self-advocacy and self-promotion, and women have a really hard time with doing that. I know we've talked a lot about people accepting that if women are kind of putting themselves out there, but I think there's an element of being able to show what you're capable of doing and what you're delivering to the business, where I think it's very easy sometimes in the day-to-day, it's so busy, and you know that men are much more capable, or they're much more likely to be talking about what they're doing and what they're delivering in whatever form it is. And like one simple example I had is I have a really good friend who's like a VP of marketing at a large global organization. And one of the things that she does is she sends an email out to her executive stakeholders every Sunday that says, by the way, these are the top 5 things that my team delivered for you guys last week. And maybe we're all not in that position to do that, but I think there are small ways that you can kind of make those changes and to have, or to share that message, that sheds light on kind of what you're responsible for, what your team's doing, or even taking the opportunity, and this is another small thing, like in your team meetings or lunch and learns and things like that, to really talk about what your team is capable of doing and what they are doing, so progress on projects on things that are important to delivering the objectives of the company for that year. And I really encourage, especially younger women on my team, to take those opportunities when they come up, because often the natural thing is for whoever's running the meeting to go to a man and say, you know what, like I think you'd be great at running this game that we're playing with our team this week. But it would be really great if we consciously said, you know what, I think we should just take turns. Once it's a man, the next time it's a lady, and then people get used to seeing you talking, and then you're much more likely to have more conversations about yourself and what you're working on in your team and things like that. And it's really just getting yourself out there, and even if it's like volunteering on committees or just different ways of getting yourself out there and more visible within the organization.
Krista, do you want to?
Sure, what women can do for themselves. I think what I said earlier a bit about just like creating new spaces and like inventing what you want and feel empowered and inspired to invent what you want. But I think within organizations, I mean, find the visible women and the women in tech ERGs, find your peers who can create that with you. Focus on what your strengths are and what you enjoy contributing. You know, is it social? Is it organizational? Is it, you know, are you just, can you lift things? Like find the thing that feels good for you in a way to help and help others, lift other women and gender marginalized folks up. I mean, I like in what I'm working towards is like, what's the island Wonder Woman is from? Like I feel like I try to support women and choose women in every single aspect. I will only go to women health practitioners. I will only like listen to women on Spotify. They are gonna get my 0.00 whatever cents. I try to just like always gauge who am I supporting, where is this money going to, who gets this opportunity, how can I lift them up in little ways, and because I think it adds up.
Jody? Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I talk a lot about when I share my story is that I feel super privileged to have had many incredible people that have lifted me up and taught me, you know, whether you call it, I call it a hub, people can call it a board of advisors, personal board of advisors. And sometimes when, you know, you look at other people who've been able to do that, it looks really hard, particularly if one is introverted or finds it difficult, don't know where to go to get a mentor, get a sponsor. And I really encourage people to sort of remember, even it's just baby steps and actually finding just some courage to say hello to a new human. You don't need to know when you meet a new human, hi, can you be my friend? Can we have a coffee? Can we get to know each other? And then if you have a connection that feels authentic, you know, real, and whether your values aligned or similar lived experience, there's many different dimensions around which you can connect with someone. Being courageous enough to just say, I'm trying to develop this particular skill, or I'm trying to learn, you know, I love to public speak, I'm kind of scared of it, it's something I'd like to pursue, is that something you can help me with? And finding some people, or putting some people around you who can almost help you advance your own goals, even if they're super micro goals, and can support you in advancing. I fully give credit to the sort of 15 people that throughout my life have really lifted me up and taught me things. And you know, I think it can be less difficult than you think if you break it down into some baby steps. And I spend a lot of my time talking, teaching, sharing how to do that. Happy to talk to anyone who's interested in learning more about that. Because I think the power of having people around you who can advocate for you when you're not in the room is absolutely critical, particularly if you find yourself in any form of minority position, whatever lens, in all lenses in an organization, you need others who are going to champion you.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's give them a hand before we go into the Q&A portion of this. There is a mic right over there, and if you have any questions, please step up to it. We'd see.
Hi. Thank you so much for doing this. A couple of questions came up. Why are women opting out? And what can the government do? And what came to my mind was Jody Wilson-Raybould, Jane Philpott, and earlier Belinda Stronach. What can we do to support women when they're saying, these values are not my values, and rather than having them be crucified, you know, what can we all do?
Who would like to?
I got nothing.
Or you, Sarah. Yeah. You should start that one.
I'm the academic. I don't know how to do anything. That's why I'm in academia. I just want to echo points that you were making about lifting people up. I think that what we can do is really recognize when people are being pushed down and go and deliberately lift them up. I mean, I don't know how to, at the political level, like what do we do about Jody Wilson-Raybould? I don't know, but like when you see that equivalent person in your organization, the thing to do is go lift them up, to go say, wow, that was a really fantastic point, or, you know, I agree, this isn't a comfortable conversation for me either. It's so much easier to advocate for someone else than it is to advocate for yourself. And so I think I just want to build on what you were saying, is like every choice you make is a choice whether or not to support someone. So that's what that would be my answer.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
So you should have answered it.
You summarized it great.
Do we have any other questions? Yeah.
Hi.
First of all, thank you for doing this. So I have a question. Sometimes when I'm having conversations with people, both men and women, these certain stereotypes come up in conversation, and mostly it's a joke. They pass it off as a joke, whether it's related to women, whether it's related to the fact that, I'm from a certain community or anything. How do you deal with something like that without making them feel like I'm attacking them? Because it's a joke. I understand. It's lighthearted. But sometimes it's in a group setting, and I don't want people to go home thinking that I'm okay with jokes like that. I'm not okay with jokes like that. But at the same time, I don't want to seem too pushy, and I don't want to think that I hate them. I just want them to be educated.
So I can,
How do you
I can
deal
take
with
a stab
something
at
like
this
that?
one. What I would say from personal experience is that in a group setting, it's really tough to call somebody out in that situation. What I try to sometimes do is just to, and not like in a mean way, but just to say, hey, like maybe we can just step outside for a second and have a quick conversation. And then you can say very openly, like, I don't really appreciate like those kinds of jokes because this is how it affects me. And often what you'll find is that people will say like, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. And then they'll go back to the group setting and either they'll apologize or they'll say something that kind of like settles it down versus, like in a group setting, I feel like it's really tough to have that conversation without alienating yourself and kind of putting the other person on the defensive. Whereas one-on-one, you can really you can tell them exactly how you feel and they have the opportunity to explain themselves and to apologize to you directly.
And I love those comments, and I think super helpful. One of the things that I think is interesting, and I think certainly, depends on the culture in which you're working and the leadership tone from the top, sort of going back to what was said earlier, but if it is possible to sort of create an environment, whether it's in a small team or larger whole corporate environment, that we are going to invite each other to call each other in. I don't say that from a lofty, that is a very hard thing to do. But one of the things I've noticed, and we've implemented that in our team, and it's not easy. It's really actually hard to do it. But once you set the tone of we're going to call each other in, including please call me in, if I've said something that is, not as evolved as it should be, or if I need to be educated in terms of my impact. But as soon as we created this sort of tone of, even in our team, we are going to give each other permission to call each other in. And the response isn't going to be a defensive response. It's going to be an open, listening, curious response. The whole tone has started to shift in terms of that willingness. And then there is, a lot more possibility for having more public conversations, going back to your question of not wanting anyone to go home thinking that that's okay. But of course, that's a difficult thing to do if you're starting from early in the journey. But
thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Yes, go ahead.
Hi. I'm just so happy and thankful to...
Can you speak up a little bit? Thanks.
Okay, I'll try. From where I come from, this kind of conversation, it's not even possible. But I am not even in tech, but I would just wanted to ask a lot of newcomers that are in tech, but there is a lot of process that they go through before they are being able to work. And then once they have a work permit, they can do any other thing, but not the field or the job that they would love. And then as women in tech, what you guys doing for someone who just got in Canada, whether it's refugee or immigrant, to be able to continue, maybe go to school and continue in tech, study in tech, and also get a job in tech? Because a lot of women that I'm a translator, so I help sometimes French or Arabic or English, and they would tell me that I studied in tech, but since I got here, I had to do any other job because I am not, I would not get the opportunity that I would love. So what's being done in that field?
What's been done, what can be done? We're talking about sort of newcomers, refugees, with perhaps even buckets of experience transitioning in and not being able to find a spot for themselves.
Yeah, that's funny because the whole tech scene, when you think of the fact that there's not enough, tech workers here in Canada, we do sponsor a lot of people from overseas to come to Canada. And we don't ask for Canadian experience, obviously, so we do believe that with their experience, they could help us build out what we need to do in our organizations. And I think we need to have that broad thinking, like what you said about having the potential. You need a sponsor. You need someone who's going to give you that opportunity. You think of entry-level people even who don't have any experience. They're fresh grads. Who's going to give them that opportunity? When you see job ads that say, this is an entry-level position, but you must have 4 or 5 years of experience. How do you gain that experience if you're a fresh grad? So there has to be a leap of faith at some point. And just because you've never done it before or you don't have that many years of experience doesn't mean that you're not going to succeed. When I took on my first management role, I didn't have any management experience prior to that. Someone took a leap of faith. I had a sponsor who believed that, you know what, I think you can do this. And there were moments where I thought, no, I don't think I could do this. Like, it's just too much responsibility. And this person, a male, actually said, no, I believe in you. I think you can do it. I think I have confidence that you can do it. Sometimes that's all you need. You need someone to push you and to make you believe that you can take things over the line, even though you may not believe it deep down inside. And I think it's just the way we think. We're so trained to look at certain things on a resume or your pedigree, and that's not that important. If you look at some tech companies now, they also don't even look at education anymore. You don't need a university degree to work at Facebook. You don't need a university degree to work at Google. It's things like that that are changing, but we need to change a little bit faster. We need to have more faith in people.
I'll just say one thing about newcomers is that the research suggests that often when you have a family that's a newcomer, because we don't do a good job of recognizing credentials from other countries, that the family will decide to invest in the man's re-credentialing and not the woman's. And so we get this unequal experience of newcomers because of family-based decisions about who will get re-credentialed and the lack of resources in Canada to help people get re-credentialed. So it's a big problem in the tech space and elsewhere.
Yeah. So it seems like that is a bridge that needs to be crossed. I do know that from a couple of the groups that I've interviewed, I've heard about the power of networking and finding.
Yeah, it was on my mind as well. It's like I didn't say anything because I don't really have the solution yet as to how to fix it, but it's the power of, opening networks and then the individuals with relationship capital using it actively. I had an example of, I took an Uber 2 weeks ago. I met this incredible man. He was reskilling. In that relationship, they decided that the husband would reskill, doing an MBA, has an engineer driving an Uber, because cannot get an interview, and his wife, who is credentialed as a CA, could not get anyone to answer one email. So I had a conversation with him. I connected him to 10 banks. He's now in 4 interviews, and his wife just got an interview at Wealthsimple, and she sent me an email yesterday saying, and it's not, thank you, but it's not, for me, I'm using the example not as we should all be doing that kind of thing. It's extremely hard, and how do we do that at scale? Because I'm only one human. We need to do that, millions of us, to go out of our way, and it sounds so trite, that simple line of we actually have to go out of our way, but we have to find a way to solve that problem at scale, and it keeps me up at night. So it's a really good question, and I didn't say anything initially because I don't have a solution, but I'm so glad you asked the question, and I think it's something we all really need to think deeply about, because if we're welcoming humans to our country, we actually need to give those humans opportunities to thrive.
Thank you for that question.
Hi, just as a sidebar, I've attended some of your events, Jody and Sarah, and they were wonderful, so thank you. My question is, what would you say are some of the tactics that you have when you just feel like you're sort of at the end of your rope and you're pushing and pushing and pushing? Are there things that you sort of have in your toolbox that you use to sort of come back, recenter, refocus, so that you're coming at it from a positive lens, not just anger?
It's a great question.
I would say for me, kind of related, I connect with my little group of my little personal board of advisors, and I commiserate, and I ask for pep talks, and I just narrow my input, because when I'm looking broader, I'm heartbroken, and so I just really think these 2 people get to talk to me, these 3 people are the ones I want to hear from, and just try and rebuild and just nurture, and what, for me, I know will help ground me and bring me back to a place of thinking, okay, now what are my next steps? But I just like kind of shut it all down and ask for some support.
I just try to transfer. I'm angry all the time, like searingly angry all the time, searingly. But I basically say, okay, that's a lot of energy to be angry. What if I use that, that energy? I'm just going to rechannel it into change and motivating and doing my work. And so I try to view the anger as like the fire inside of me, and I just try to treat it differently, because if I didn't, it would be hard to get up. Yeah, I'm with you.
I mean, this work is hard. And I think knowing yourself well enough to give yourself permission to take a break of it when you need to. And your body will tell you when it needs to if you don't listen. I was in bed for 9 days straight. Today is like day one of doing any activities, because my body was like, Jody, you got to just chill it down. You can't do all the things. You can't solve all the world's problems. And sometimes you really just need to take a break and nourish and give yourself permission to do that.
Thank you. I'm just going to get you to, because you just set off some thinking in this concept of a personal board of advisors. Can you just speak for 1 minute about that?
I mean, also just called it a hub, I guess. Yeah. I think, like you, the people who've supported me and helped me and given me opportunities and said, I believe in you when I didn't. I think we all, hopefully we all have that. But I've been deliberate about nurturing it, about creating a little group email of the people that I've said, hey, when I'm coming up with a new idea, can I run it past you 4 people? When I'm having our time, can I reach out to you? And they've agreed, and I think making that explicit. We all have those friendships and people are there for us, but for me it was really helpful saying this is why I'm gonna call you. Cool. Yeah.
I didn't want to have that point go disregarded, because I've heard a lot about it, and it's the same as if you run across an NGO and they have a board of advisors, except this is your board of advisors who are looking out for you, right? And understand where you want to go and can help you shepherd your way. You have the question.
Hi. Yeah, I want to speak to a few things that Sarah said, and then I have a question to follow up. Talking about the double bind, Sarah gave the example of being told that she needs training. I personally have been in that situation. I've had a senior male leader call me over to a group of people and tell me that I need training in front of all of them. And so being a woman, but also being a Black woman, having that layer, I wonder how you guys manage the double bind, because on one hand, you want to be extra palatable to people so you don't lose your job, but also right. You want to say something.
Okay. Who wants to? I think they're all
take that
you.
one first.
Caroline, you want to take a stab at it?
I think I'll give somebody else the chance to go first.
This is a tough.
Well, I'll just say, so I haven't figured out the answer, hence being 56 years old and being told I need coaching. It hasn't changed. I was told I needed coaching when I was 22, and now I'm 56, and so apparently I'm impervious to coaching. And part of it is that I'm I don't actually, yeah, we could all use coaching, we should all learn, develop, improve, but I think on some level, I'm I know that's sexism. And for, women of color, there's a whole even more complicated double bind because of expectations around Black women and things like that, so, which I haven't personally had to experience. I get some of it because I'm a lesbian and people then code me as that angry lesbian. I had someone write a Washington Post editorial about me and didn't say it was me, but said that it was a gay woman who was angry, and I'm well, okay.
Might be all of us.
In a particular field, that was very obvious that it was me. So, so that the intersectional nature makes it even harder. I don't know, except for to just, when you get that feedback, read it for what it is. It's the white supremacist patriarchy telling you need coaching, not an actual need to get coaching. And you just have to do the self-care around it, because you have to understand where it's coming from.
Sorry, so for clarity, it wasn't job training coaching. I think you might know that. It was I came out of what I thought was a very successful meeting, and then a week later they're hey, people might think you're a little angry. Like
Right,
that
well, that's what I mean, that
yeah.
kind of coaching, I agree, yeah. No, that's exactly the coaching that I get. I apparently need to.
Okay.
I'm with you.
Yeah, I've worked with a lot of executives, and sometimes when I get these suggestions, someone needs coaching, it's typically a woman. And I always ask, why would you think this woman needs coaching? And I try to get some feedback from the executive team. What do they have to say about her? And it's always the same words. Very emotional. She's very angry. She takes things too personally. And so I said at one meeting, I said, okay, that's interesting you say that, but did you not notice this male executive is equally emotional to the point where he cries in meetings? And I said, she didn't even cry. Don't you think he needs coaching too? And the comment I got was, well, he's just a teddy bear. That's just the way he is. He's so lovable. So it's very positive for a male to show their emotions.
Right.
And for women, we've got to fix that. So it's this, the way we're thinking about men and women, it's just so different. And I don't have the answer of how to change that, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think systemically, big question. But in terms of you personally, I of course cannot relate to your lived experience. But I have had the experience of working with an all-male, 12 white, 45-year-old men board of directors, telling me that I needed coaching for my womanness in my leadership. And in that moment, there was nothing that I could do to change my circumstance. I needed them. I'm a single mom. I'm divorced. I have no other financial support. I needed the job until I figured out a different plan. But I really enabled myself to sort of channel the observation to, that's not really feeling comfortable for me. I don't want to be in a situation where I'm feeling so shitty about myself, and the shame that I ended up taking on and taking so deep inside of me for many, many months as a result of that lived experience, and then sort of nodding nicely, going and getting the coaching. And in fact, I used the coaching to coach me right out on them. So thank you for that investment. But I would encourage you to sort of think about how it makes you feel and what changes you might need to make to your circumstance to be in an environment that makes you feel that you can be, who you are unapologetically.
Yeah. Thank you. And we have time only for one more question. So, hey, you're it.
Thank you. And I have a suggestion and a question from Christine. And a special thanks to Sarah for your speech. I thought about it, and I think that all of us as women should believe in these values, and should have to start from our family unit and train our son and our daughter equally. And when they grow up, I think that after some years, we didn't need a special Women's Day, maybe Women's in Tech Day and something like this. And we trained our children and start from our family unit, and then try to change our workplace and fight there. And you told that most of women that come for interview ask less salary. I want to know that how can you or other recruiters like you can help them to know about what they can ask, because there are limited information, and most of us are a newcomer and didn't know all things. And I want to know that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I talk about this a lot. I think people don't know how to ask for the salary that they want. I've had men ask me, how should I negotiate that? I've had women ask. I've had people overseas ask. And the best advice I could give is there is a way to get what you want and to get paid fairly, to ask for it in a way that doesn't sound offensive to an employer. But you need supporters to help you with that. You need sort of like mentors to guide you with those conversations. And I always say, you could take training, you could watch videos, you can educate yourself reading books, but sometimes when you have a mentor that can tell you personal stories and really guide you on something as personal as that, that will be the greatest benefit to your career. I've mentored a lot of younger women who say, how should I negotiate my salary? And I'll say, it's down to even like look them straight in the eye and say, this is what I'm looking for, and I know that this is what I'm worth. This is what the salary is in this market. And don't ever say that, but I'm willing to take this much, because they're so afraid that someone's going to retract the offer. I don't know anyone who retracted an offer because someone wanted to negotiate a salary. Never. And so I always say, you know, this is what I'm looking for. I'm willing to negotiate, but can we have a conversation about this? And when you can guide someone and really role play with them and have a personal conversation with them, I think that's the greatest support that you can get in terms of feeling confident and walking into an interview. I've interviewed women where they've said, but I'm willing to take less. I don't know what your budget is. I'm looking for 120, but 100 is okay too. And I always say, why did you add the but? You were doing so well before that. And then they'll kind of get flustered, and I'll say, I'm going to pretend I didn't hear that, but here's some advice for you in the future. And I will say it, because even though that's not my job, and you know, as an employer, I may want to stick to, hey, we got this person who lowballed themselves. We could save ourselves $20,000. But what kind of culture are you creating?
Right.
You know, and you're perpetuating that gap. So it's really educating people, sponsoring them, being part of that network to uplift other women, you know?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Can we, Krista Couture, Sarah Kaplan, Christine Song, Jody Kovitz, and Caroline De Silva. Let's give them a big hand. It's very generous of them to come here. They're very busy, I'm sure, but thank you again. And I think that's our day for today. Thank you to Visible Women and Women in Technology for organizing such a wonderful, wonderful event. I know that we still have some people that are online watching this. Thank you to them for tuning in as well. We are going to have, I think both organizations are going to have some networking happening after, and there are some workshops being facilitated. And if these women have about 5 minutes left before they jet off to their next stops, you can probably run up and meet them as well. Thank you all for being here, and happy International Women's Day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Where are you off to now?
Can I do a hug?
Yes.
Oh my God.
Thank you so much.